Hello everyone. This will be my first video on my second channel. I'll be reading A Thousand Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. Let's begin, shall we? There were exactly 4 moments that defined my life. This was the first. Blossom Grove, Georgia, United States of America. 12 years ago, aged 5. Jeg vil dra na, jeg vil res him igjen. I shouted as loud as I could, telling my mama that I wanted to leave now. I wanted to go back home. We're not going back home, Rune, and we are not leaving. This is our home now, she replied in English. She crouched down and looked me straight in the eye. Rune, she said softly, I know you didn't want to leave Oslo, but your papa got a new job here in Georgia. Her hand ran up and down my arm, but it didn't make me feel any better. I didn't want to be in this place in America. I wanted to go back home. Slut a snack English, I snapped. I hated speaking English. Since we set off for America from Norway, Mama and Papa would only speak to me in English. They said I had to practice. I didn't want to. My mama stood up and lifted a box off the ground. We're in America, Rune. They speak English here. You've been speaking English for as long as you've been speaking Norwegian. It's time to use it. I stood my ground, glaring at my mama as she walked around me into the house. I looked around the small street where we now lived. There were 8 houses. They were all big, but they all looked different. Ours was painted red with white windows and a huge porch. My room was big and it was on the bottom floor. I did think that was kind of cool. Sort of, anyway. I'd never slept downstairs before. In Oslo, my room was upstairs. I looked at the houses. All of them were painted bright colors, light blue, yellows, pinks. Then I looked at the house next door, right next to ours. We shared a patch of grass. Both houses were big and our yards were too, but there was no fence or wall between them. If I wanted to, I could run into their yard and there'd be nothing to stop me. The house was bright white, with a porch wrapped right around it. They had rocking chairs and a big chair swinging on the front. Their window frames were painted black, and there was a window opposite my bedroom window, right opposite. I didn't like that. I didn't like that I could see into their bedroom and they could see into mine. There was a stone on the ground. I kicked it with my foot, watching it roll down the street. I turned to follow my mama, but then I heard a noise. It was coming from the house next to ours. I looked at their front door, but nobody came out. I was climbing the steps to my porch when I saw some movement from the side of the house, from next door's bedroom window, the one opposite my own. My hand froze on the rail, and I watched as a girl, dressed in a bright blue dress, climbed through the window. She jumped down onto the grass and dusted off her hands on her thighs. I frowned, my eyebrows pulling down, as I waited for her to lift her head. She had brown hair, which was piled up on her head like a bird's nest. She wore a big white bow on the side of it. When she looked up, she looked right at me. Then she smiled. She smiled at me so big, she waved fast, then ran forward and stopped in front of me. She pushed out her hand. Hi, my name is Poppy Litchfield. I'm 5 years old, and I live right next door. I stared at the girl. She had a funny accent. It made the English words sound different to the way I had learned them back in Norway. The girl, Poppy, had a smudge of mud on her face and bright yellow rain boots on her feet. They had a big red balloon on the side. She looked weird. I looked up from her feet and fixed my eyes on her hand. She was still holding it out. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what she wanted. Poppy sighed. Shaking her head, she reached for my hand and forced it into hers. She shook them up and down twice and said, "A handshake. My mama says it's only right to shake the hand of new people that you meet." She pointed at our hands. That was a handshake, and that was polite because I don't know you. I didn't say anything. For some reason, my voice wouldn't work. When I looked down, I realized it was because our hands were still joined. She had mud on her hands too. In fact, she had mud everywhere. "What's your name?" Poppy asked. Her head was tipped to the side. A small twig was stuck in her hair. "Hey," she said, tugging on our hands. "I asked for your name." I cleared my throat. "My name is Rune. Rune Erik Christiansen." Poppy scrunched her face up, her big pink lips sticking out all funny. "You sound weird," she blurted. I snatched my hand away. "Ni det, yours jeg ik," I snapped. Her face screwed up even more. What did you just say?" Poppy asked. As I turned to walk into my house, I didn't want to speak to her anymore. Feeling angry, I spun back around. I said, "No, I don't. I was speaking Norwegian," I said in English this time. Poppy's green eyes grew huge. She stepped closer and closer again and asked, "Norwegian? Like the Vikings?" My mama read me a book about the Vikings. It said they were from Norway. Her eyes got even bigger. "Rune, are you a Viking?" Her voice had gone all squeaky. It made me feel good. I stuck out my chest. My papa always said I was a Viking. Like all the men in my family, we were big, strong Vikings. "Yeah," I said. "We are real Vikings from Norway." A big smile spread across Poppy's face, and a loud, girly giggle burst from her mouth. She lifted her hand and pulled on my hair. "That's why you have long blonde hair and crystal blue eyes. Because you're a Viking. At first I thought you looked like a girl." "I'm not a girl," I butted in, but Poppy didn't seem to care. I ran my hand through my long hair. It came down to my shoulders. All the boys in Oslo had their hair like this. "But now I see it's because you're a real-life Viking, like Thor. He had long blonde hair and blue eyes too. You're just like Thor." "Yeah," I agreed. "Thor does, and he's the strongest god of them all." Poppy nodded her head, then put her hand on my shoulders. Her face had gone all serious, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "Rune, I don't tell everyone this, but I go on adventures." I screwed up my face. I didn't understand. Poppy stepped closer and looked up into my eyes. She squeezed my arms. She tilted her head to the side. She looked all around us, then leaned in to speak. "I don't normally bring people with me on my journeys, but you're a Viking, and we all know that Vikings grow big and strong, and they are really good with adventures and exploring, and long walks, and capturing baddies, and all kinds of things." I was still confused, but then Poppy stepped back and held out her hand again. "Rune," she said, her voice serious and strong, "you live right next door. You're a Viking, and I just love Vikings. I think we should be best friends." "Best friends?" I asked. Poppy nodded her head and pushed her hand further toward me. Slowly reaching out my hand, I gripped hold of hers and gave it 2 shakes, like she'd shown me, a handshake. "So now we are best friends?" I asked as Poppy pulled her hand back. "Yes," she said excitedly. "Poppy and Rune." She brought her finger to her chin and looked up. Her lips stuck out again like she was thinking very hard. "It sounds good, don't you think? Poppy and Rune, best friends for infinity." I nodded because it did sound good. Poppy put her hand in mine. "Show me your bedroom. I want to tell you about what adventure we can go on next." She began to pull me forward, and we ran into the house. When we pushed through my bedroom door, Poppy rushed straight to my window. This is a room exactly opposite mine. I nodded my head, and she squealed, running toward me to take my hand in hers again. "Rune," she said excitedly, "we can talk all night and make walkie-talkies with cans and strings. We can whisper our secrets to each other when everyone else is asleep, and we can plan and play." And Poppy kept talking, but I didn't mind. I liked the sound of her voice. I liked her laugh, and I liked the big white bow in her hair. Maybe Georgia won't be so bad after all, I thought. Not if I have Poppy Litchfield as my very best friend. And that was Poppy and me from that day on. Poppy and Rune, best friends for infinity. Or so I thought. Funny how things change. Poppy, 9 years ago, aged 8. "Where are we going, Daddy?" I asked as he held my hand gently, guiding me to the car. I glanced back at my school, wondering why I was being taken out of class early. It was only lunch break. I wasn't supposed to leave yet. My daddy didn't say anything to me as we walked. He just squeezed my hand. I searched along the school fence, a strange feeling pulling in my stomach. I love school. I love to learn. And we had history next. It was my absolute favorite subject. I didn't want to miss it. Poppy! Rune, my very best friend, was standing at the fence, watching me go. His hands were holding real tight to the metal bars. "Where are you going?" he shouted. I sat next to Rune in class. We were always together. School was no fun when the other wasn't there. I turned my head towards my daddy's face for answers, but he didn't look back at me. He stayed silent, looking back at Rune. I shouted, "I don't know." Rune watched me all the way out to the car. I climbed in the back and sat on my booster seat, my daddy buckling me in. I heard the whistle blow in the schoolyard, signaling the end of lunch. I glanced out the window and watched all of the kids running back inside, but not Rune. Rune stayed at the fence watching me. His long blonde hair was blowing in the wind as he mouted, "Are you okay?" But my daddy got in the car and started driving away before I could answer. Rune ran along the fence, following our car, until Mrs. Davis came and made him go inside. When the school was out of sight, my daddy said, "Poppy." "Yes, Daddy," I replied. "You know Mama has been living with us for a while now." I nodded my head. My Mama had moved into the room opposite mine a while back. My Mama had said it was because she needed help. My Papa had died when I was only a baby. My Mama had lived on her own for years until she came to live with us. Do you remember what your Mama and I told you about why Mama could no longer live by herself? I breathed in through my nose and whispered, "Yes, because she needed our help, because she's sick." My stomach flipped over as I spoke. My Mama was my very best friend, while her and Rune were tied at the absolute top. My Mama said I was just like her. Before she was sick, we would go on lots of adventures. She read to me every night about the great explorers of the world. She would tell me all about history, about Alexander the Great, the Romans, and my favorite, the samurai from Japan. They were Mama's favorite too. I knew my Mama was sick, but she never acted sick. She always smiled. She gave tight hugs and made me laugh. She always said she had moonbeams in her heart and sunshine in her smile. Mama told me that meant she was happy. She made me happy too. But over the last few weeks, Mama had slept a lot. She'd been too tired to do much of anything else. In fact, most nights I would now read to her as she stroked my hair and smiled at me. And that was okay, because Mama's smiles were the best kind of smiles to get. "That's right, Pumpkin, she's sick. In fact, she's very, very sick. Do you understand?" I frowned, but nodded my head and said yes. "That's why we're going home early," he explained. "She's waiting for you She wants to see you. Wants to see her little buddy. I didn't understand why my daddy had to bring me home early to visit my mama, when the first thing I did every night after school was go into her room and talk to her. While she lay in bed, she liked to hear all about my day. We turned into our street and parked in our driveway. My daddy didn't move for a few seconds, and then he turned to me and said, "I know you're only 8, Pumpkin, but you had to be a big brave girl today, okay?" I nodded my head. My daddy smiled a sad smile at me. "That's my girl." He got out of the car and walked around to my seat in the back. Taking my hand, my daddy guided me out of the car and toward the house. I could see there were more cars here than usual. I had just opened my mouth to ask whose they all were when Mrs. Christiansen, Rune's mama, came walking across the yard between our house with a big dish of food in her hands. "James," she called out, and my daddy turned to greet her. "Atlas, hey," he called back. Rune's mama stopped in front of us. Her long blonde hair was down today. It was the same color as Rune's. Mrs. Christiansen was real pretty. I loved her. She was kind and called me the daughter she never had. "I made you this. Please tell Ivy I'm thinking of you all." My daddy released my hand to take the dish. Mrs. Christiansen crouched down and pressed a kiss on my cheek. "You be a good girl, Poppy, okay?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied, and watched her cross the grass to go back into her house. My daddy sighed and tipped his head for me to follow him inside. As soon as we were through the front door, I saw my aunts and uncles sitting on the couches, and my cousins sitting on the floor of the living room, playing